And we are live. Yay! And welcome to Teaching Tip Tuesday. My name is Michelle, aka the Ignited Teacher. And what I do on Teaching Tip Tuesday is I help you to close math learning gaps by providing research-based teaching tips and effective math strategies so that um, and they can be implemented in your classroom the very next day. So thank you for being a part of Teaching Tip Tuesday tonight. If you're new here in the comment section, please tell us where you're watching from, what grade you teach, or what state you're in, or who you support, because I have some math interventionists and some principals that watch my show. Look like I have something on there, but I guess not. That must be the light. So, but if you are a part of my community and you watch Teaching Tip Tuesday very frequently, thank you for being a part of my community. And say hi, Michelle, in the chat. Tell me what you like about Teaching Tip Tuesday so we can connect and become like real virtual colleagues. That's how I sign off on my emails if you're on my email list. So we're virtual colleagues, and virtual, yeah, that's a mouthful because of what's going on. It looks like we're going to be back virtual if things do not turn around. So enough of that. School is almost taking place for me. I have another week off. Some people have already started school, bless you. This summer was a much needed rest. It was much needed. So thank you all for, showing up and supporting me in my efforts of trying to get more quality information and training out for teachers. This summer, I hosted 2 workshops. One was fraction strategies for struggling learners. It was really, really good. I had a full house. One thing about the virtual um, workshops that I host in the summer is great. You don't have to show up live. I would prefer you show up live, but like some teachers were teaching summer school, and what they did is purchase the training but watch the recording, and then you have lifetime access to the recording. So that is a good thing. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Teaching Tip Tuesday. I'm really excited about this topic, and it is evidence-based fraction strategies. Now, last week I talked about evidence-based strategies or intervention strategies, basically what it is. But before I get into it, I want you all to make sure if you are watching live or you're catching a replay that you don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I actually live stream to 3 different platforms: Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. But all of my Teaching Tip Tuesday videos are housed on YouTube. So, and then I have a playlist. So if you don't know when I come on, or if you forget, a lot of times on my Facebook page and my Twitter account, those get pushed down in the live stream. I pin it, but then once the next Teaching Tip Tuesday happens, I unpin it on my thing. So if you're watching me live or on the replay, definitely hop on over to YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell notification so that you are get notified when I go live, or sometimes I upload videos. So don't want you to miss that. Help your girl out. to hit that 1,000 subscribers. I'm at, I think, 820. So all I need is 180 more of you all to subscribe. So I'm trying to hit that 1,000 mark. So back to our topic. Now, evidence-based fraction strategies. What I'm going to take tonight is a concept, which is fractions, which is always difficult. I heard a tutor, a lady that I was working with, she said fractions are the gateway to algebra. And I really didn't understand what she was saying until I became a math interventionist for at-risk ninth graders for Algebra 1. And I was like, yes, they must know fractions because slope, linear equation, all of those are fractions, or they're in fraction form. And your rise over run is in fraction form because it's a ratio. And it just goes into a deeper understanding of a fraction, and how certain things take on a fraction form. So, what is an evidence-based intervention strategy? Now, got my little notes here because I did not want to miss anything. So it starts with explicit instruction. I know a lot of teachers are like, well, I let my kids discover. If your kids are below grade level, and that's because that is the target audience that I teach, are students that struggle and students that are working beneath grade level. They don't have the capacity to actually discovery, because some teachers start out with discovery and some teachers start out with front loading their lessons and explicitly teaching. So an EBI, which is an evidence-based intervention strategy, in your model, you provide clear explanations, planned examples, and telling the children why the concept is important, and explicitly modeling steps clearly without any confusing information. This is evidence-based because it's based on research and it has been tested with our targeted population, the top population that I actually teach. So when we're talking about evidence-based intervention, it has to start with explicit instruction. And a lot of teachers are like, well, in my small group, we do this. But if you are not clearly explaining the math concept, planning for your examples that you're going to use in your lesson, you're going to lose your children. Because a lot of our students, especially kids that struggle, they have so much up here. And it's not that they don't know it and haven't seen it. It's so much. That's why when you have kids, you say, use your strategy, and it's like word vomit and everything comes out on the paper. It is not that they don't know. It's just like it's not clear. So when you're in your tier 2 instruction, you have to actually be clear in what you're teaching them with no confusing instruction. That's why when I talk to teachers and I tell them, I'm like, you have to have, clear explanations and not have a lot of bells and whistles, because a lot of children that struggle with math struggle with the reading comprehension as well. A lot of your students, if you look, a lot of those kids have, in Texas, we call it oral administration. They struggle with those things. So you really have to be careful about what you're putting in your lesson. Is it helpful or is it a distraction and taking away from that explicit instruction that you're trying to deliver to your students? Now, the next thing is this model of explicit instruction for converting improper fractions. And don't kill me, because I know I have some people who come on here and say, well, that's supposed to be a fraction is greater than one whole, converting a fraction greater than one whole. But yes, forgive me. I put improper fraction because that's what my students came from fourth grade understanding. So in here, this is explicit. So what I did in here, this was a chart that I hung in my classroom. I gave the children steps. So step one. Now I broke it down, but notice right beside it, I put the tape diagram. So when they were on their own or independent, they could go back and look at this chart and be independent and say, oh, this is how it looks in the tape diagram, bar model, or whatever you want to call it, form. Then the next step was to convert. And we added all of them up, and then they converted 10/4 to 2 2/4, and then they had to simplify. That's explicit. No confusing information, no butterflies on there for the kids to look and get lost and say, oh, I was looking at how pretty the butterfly was. It's explicit, it's clear, the information is concise, and there's not anything confusing about it. And that's what you want for your students. So the next part is, let me go back, is the next evidence-based instructional strategy for your fractions. Should you need to speak the language of your discipline or talk about academic language. I am not a huge fan of using words like, oh, the number at the bottom, because that's confusing for students. Even if they're young kids, you can say, oh, the denominator or the number at the bottom, and give them the definition right behind it. But when you get children in the habit of looking at, really looking at things that, well, hearing vocabulary that has been watered down, what you're doing is really setting the children up for failure in their later grades, because they will not, they definitely will not make that jump on their own, and you're making it difficult for the teacher behind you. So you have to speak the language of the discipline, which is mathematics. And I have a blog post on here where I talk about, different things. So it says the alligator eats the bigger number. 0 is a placeholder. That one vexes my soul. 0 is not a placeholder. If you have 0 in place value, that means that that place does not have a value. If you have $0 in the bank, and I ask teachers all the time, well, how much money do you have? You have nothing. 0 is not a placeholder. So when you cement in children's heads in first and second grade, when you're teaching place value, that 0 is a placeholder, you are setting them up for failure for multiplying decimals, multiplying zeros in whole numbers. You're setting them up for failure with zeros in subtraction, because they're looking at it as a placeholder. When we talk about place value, it means 0 does not have a value. You have nothing. Also, use the butterfly method to compare fractions. We compare fractions. We should be teaching our children to understand the role of denominators in comparing fractions, because it tells you how many in all or how large those pieces are. The next one is go next door to the neighbor's house. That is supposed to be regrouping. Don't set your children up for failure in mathematics in the upper grades, and don't give them this language that is going to expire once they leave your classroom. And you wonder why a lot of teachers that teach in like fourth and fifth grade, we're looking at first and second grade teachers because we don't lay the foundation. And I don't teach fifth grade anymore. I'll be teaching eighth grade next year, but we don't lay the foundation. But you have to speak the language of the discipline. And the last one means combine means to add. Not all the time. So keywords, and I'm hoping that teachers are not teaching keywords, because the way that these standardized tests, and just in life, words have multiple meanings. And if you're teaching them keywords, you're going to have some kids that struggle with problem solving. And please don't teach them that in the early grade. You want to teach the kids schema, and that's something that I do naturally. When, especially with fractions, I teach them different kinds of fractions. So like with problems with multiplying fractions times a whole number, well, I tell them when we multiply, we look at the pattern. When you multiply a fraction times a whole number, you'll get a whole number. And if you're with dividing fractions by a whole number, sometimes you'll get a fraction, depending on if the fraction is first or the whole number is first. So those are things that we look at different types of problems. The schema, because it helps children that struggle differentiate from all the math that they have been taught and really focus. Okay, it gives them something to hold on to. So if I know that I come to a fraction where I'm multiplying a whole number by a fraction, I know that I'm going to end up with a whole number, or a fraction greater than 1 that simplifies to a whole number. So the next thing is concrete representations. I was reading this article and they were talking about CRA, concrete, representational, and abstract. And I naturally am a visual person. So for the most part, all of my lessons begin concrete. If you look in the picture of the young man standing at the at the dry erase board, we were working on fractions. And one of the people that, well, from the district, I told her I needed some hands-on stuff for fraction, and she brought me these great things, and she was such a great person. She let me have them. So they're magnetic fractions and or fraction wheels. So my student was simplifying fractions, I think, or generating equivalent fractions, and he would move them around and use them. And even though he was in ninth grade, he needed that. And if you're in intervention, please don't skip over that, because you're really touching on where the children might be at. And just because their current grade level says that, oh, they're in fifth or fourth grade, they're supposed to be here, a lot of those students are going to be at the concrete and pictorial representation. When you get to fourth and fifth grade, more specifically fifth grade, the curriculum basically assumes that you all are actually, let me turn this up, that you all are actually shifting or moving from the concrete pictorial to the abstract. But a lot of our children aren't there. Tier 2 kids, for the most part, what you'll spend a lot of your time on, especially with fractions, is trying to wean them or move them along the progression for mastery and that vertical alignment to the abstract part, especially if they're like 5th, 6th, 7th, secondary for sure. They should not be drawing fractions. And that's one of the things that you can tell where your students are if they're still drawing fractions. So definitely one of the things that you need is for evidence and evidence-based strategy for your instruction is the concrete, which you see the fraction wheels, magnetic fraction wheels, and the pictorial. My students were doing a division problem And I bought some clip art of some cookies and created some problems so that they could solve them. And then you move to the abstract, which is where a lot of people actually lie at, especially teachers in fifth grade. They immediately go to the algorithm because a lot of them don't understand it. So the fourth evidence-based strategy is to anticipate learning difficulty. Now, this is something that I learned from the TAP program, and it has always stuck with me. It was really, really great to see, like, where really plan for the pitfalls. It's kind of like driving. So you know that certain streets have potholes. So you know to jump over in the left lane because there's going to be a pothole in the right lane. It's the same thing here. Anticipating what the children are going to struggle with. Now, when I teach adding fractions with unequal denominators, I plan for my students struggling with generating equivalent fractions. That is their weak area. Also, it takes about 5 or 6 steps to solve a problem with adding fractions with unequal denominators. So I plan for my student stamina. They're going to tap out at probably step 2. So what I do is I plan for that up front and give the kids the steps that they need. So if you look to the left, you see my anchor chart. I was in my small group where we solve problems with unequal denominators. And then I started with just fractions. And then we moved to whole numbers, mixed numbers, which is something totally different because the kids have to simplify. It's a lot of steps. But if you plan for those in your lessons, they will be something, first of all, your lesson won't fall apart. And the kids will get it because you have bridged that gap and basically filled the learning pothole. That's what we're going to call it. It's like jumping over and say, hey, I put this here so that you won't have this boom in the learning pothole so that it can run smoothly. So when you anticipate what they're going to struggle with and you plan for it in your lesson, like dividing a fraction by a whole number, my students struggle with that because they struggle with division. So if you know your kids are struggling with division and they have to use division for another concept, go ahead and plan for that weakness there so that you can fill that gap so that the lesson and the understanding doesn't fall apart. So the next one is, and the last one, which is problem solving. Now, this is on my blog, and it's how to teach problem solving without using keywords. So here, I tell my students that reading is thinking. Having an attack strategy is important. So what I teach my students is reading is thinking. So I take what they have learned, those reading comprehension strategies, and put them inside of my problem solving strategy. So it breaks it down more explicitly. And that's how you use explicit instruction inside of your problem solving strategy. You make it so clear and where the kids don't even have to worry about everything that they need is there. One of the things that I found with problem solving strategies, it does not support struggling learners that struggle with reading. And that's why I hosted that problem solving workshop where I'm teaching teachers. I have one more session teaching them how to use like context clues, thinking routines to help support kids that struggle with reading, because most of the time they're double dippers. And that's the unfortunate part. But this is on my blog at fuelgreatminds.com, how to teach problem solving without using keywords. And then I go into connect the math with the text. Those are all attack strategies. So if you have a problem solving strategy, that is not really working for the kids that struggle, but it works for the other kids, that means that it's not explicit enough. The strategy that you're teaching them inside the problem solving strategy is not explicit enough, and the kids are struggling with a deficit in their own deficit, which is really probably not the math. More often than not, it's the reading. So, it's that's just one of those things. So I'm going to recap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because I was giving you the 5 evidence-based intervention strategies for fractions. And the first one is use explicit instruction. You have to make things clear without having those confusing things in there for the children. The next one is use the language of the discipline. I showed you that on my blog. And if you want to read that, you can hop on over to fuelgreatminds.com/blog, or you can scroll down. But you have to speak the language of the discipline. The third one is and I think I skipped over that, multiple meaning words. And concrete representations. I left that out. But the concrete representation and to the abstract, you need to be using that with your students, because a lot of times, even though our student expectation may say start here, you may need to start with the concrete and patching it up and just kind of front loading your lessons with that, because you know that you have some kids that may need it. The fourth one is anticipating learning difficulties. Fill the pothole. Don't let your kids just walk off into the pothole, which is their learning gap, and you know that they're going to struggle with. Plan for those learning gaps that the students have. Put them in your lessons. Like for me, I put T-charts because I know my kids struggle with multiplication. So I'm not going to stress with division and multiplication. I'm giving T-charts, something that will fill that learning gap so that they can get over the learning gap pothole or jump in the other lane, so that the comprehension and understanding and lesson doesn't fall apart. And the last one is problem solving. Make sure when you're teaching fractions that you're teaching the students an attack strategy, because they get tripped up on fractions because fractions use multiplication, division, and addition within the problem. So a lot of kids will use addition, subtraction of whole numbers instead of the fraction. So make sure you're being explicit in that problem solving attack strategy that you're using for fractions. And then we're going to wrap up today. So like I said, that I taught a lot of these strategies this summer, and what I'm doing is, if you want to purchase the fraction strategies for struggling learners, the link is in the description. And if you're on my email list, there is a coupon for $10 off of this workshop. It's 3 sessions. It also has Google Slides that go with it. The first session is about unit fractions. The second session is decomposing and all of those things. And the third session is adding fractions with unequal denominators. And I wrap it all up into one nice bow, and you get lifetime access to this fraction strategies. And if you have any questions about it, you can always message me or leave a comment in the comment section. So thank you so much for tuning in to Teaching Tip Tuesday. If you're watching this on the replay, definitely hit me up in the comments section. Tell me what you think about it. If you're watching it live, let me know, what do you think about these evidence-based strategies that I have presented in this Teaching Tip Tuesday. And I'll see you all next week for another episode of Teaching Tip Tuesday. Bye-bye.